I watched the 6:10 Greyhound pull away without me, my suitcase still in my hand, and felt the future fold itself shut like a letter I would never open. It was late August of 1954, and the air over the bus station shimmered with the last heat of summer. The pavement smelled like rain though it hadn't rained in days, and the yellow station lights made everything look a little theatrical, like I was standing on a stage and had forgotten my lines. The driver leaned out his window once, glanced at me, and then pulled the door closed with a tired hiss. The bus groaned forward, carrying 3 soldiers, a woman in a navy coat, and the version of me I had almost become. I was 19 years old and had been awarded a scholarship to study journalism in Chicago. Not a small thing, not in our town. The letter had come in a cream envelope with my name typed neatly across the front. My mother had set it on the kitchen table next to the sugar bowl, as if it were a church bulletin or a bill from the electric company. My father had read it twice, then folded it carefully and slipped it back inside. "You'd be good at that," he had said, not looking at me. Our town had one main street, 2 churches, and a movie theater that changed its marquee letters by hand. In the evenings, the storefronts closed one by one, metal grates rattling down, and the beauty parlor windows glowed pink as women sat under humming dryers, trading news and recipes. I had grown up with the clack of my father's typewriter in the small back office of the weekly paper, ink staining his cuffs, the smell of newsprint as familiar to me as bread rising in the oven. From the time I was 12, I had wanted to write stories that mattered. Not just church socials and harvest yields, but stories about women who ran for office, about factories changing towns, about the quiet ways people endured. I imagined myself in a city newsroom, sleeves rolled up, pencil tucked behind my ear, my name printed beneath bold headlines. The scholarship was my ticket there. Tuition covered. A dormitory room. Even a small stipend for books. But that summer, my father's cough had deepened into something that wouldn't leave. It echoed through the house at night, a dry, stubborn rattle. The doctor's visits became more frequent, the bills more discreetly folded. My mother started keeping a small notebook in the kitchen drawer, numbers penciled in and erased until the paper thinned. 2 weeks before I was meant to leave, my father called me into the office. The typewriter sat silent, a sheet of paper rolled halfway through, abandoned mid-sentence. "I can't keep up the pace," he said. "Not the way I used to." He didn't say more than that. He didn't have to. I had been proofreading his articles since I was 14. I knew the subscription lists. I knew which advertisers paid late and which ones needed reminding. I knew how to refill the ink ribbon and how to set the type for the classifieds. "You'll go," my mother insisted that evening, pressing her lips tight as she kneaded biscuit dough. "We'll manage." But manage meant something different in our house than it did in the brochures from Chicago. Manage meant cutting back on meat, turning down the heat, pretending the cough wasn't worsening. Manage meant my mother taking in mending from the ladies at church, her fingers pricked and sore by lamplight. I lay awake those last nights listening to the porch swing creak in the warm dark, cicadas sawing the air apart. I pictured the campus buildings of brick and ivy I'd seen in the pamphlet. I imagined walking across a quad scattered with leaves, notebooks pressed to my chest, my future unfolding in orderly columns. And I imagined the paper office quiet, dust settling on the typewriter keys. The morning of the bus, I dressed in my one good skirt and pinned my hair back carefully. My suitcase was small, brown leather with a handle worn soft by years in our attic. My mother packed sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. My father stood in the doorway, thinner than he had been in spring. "You don't have to decide today," he said, though of course I did. At the station, time moved strangely. A radio inside the ticket office played a morning program, some crooner singing about lost love. The soldiers joked loudly, their duffel bags slung over shoulders. The woman in the navy coat dabbed perfume onto her wrists. I stepped toward the bus once. My shoe touched the metal step. And then I thought of my father alone in that office, the typewriter silent. I thought of the paper folding in on itself, of our name disappearing from the masthead. So I stepped back. The driver looked at me, waiting. "I'm not going," I heard myself say. He shrugged, as if I had changed my mind about a hat or a handbag, and closed the door. That evening, I unpacked my suitcase. I smoothed each blouse and returned it to the dresser drawer. I placed the scholarship letter inside my Bible, between Psalms and Proverbs, as though it were something sacred and already past. The next Monday, I took my seat behind my father's desk. The typewriter felt heavier under my fingers than it ever had before. I began with small things, rewriting notices, calling advertisers, correcting misspellings. By October, I was covering town council meetings, sitting in the back of the room while men in suits argued about road repairs and water lines. I wrote about harvest festivals and school board decisions, about a factory expansion that promised 20 new jobs. I signed my name to nothing. The byline remained my father's. He grew weaker that winter. The cough hollowed him out. On cold mornings, I could see his breath in the office before the stove warmed the room. Sometimes he would dictate an article from his chair, and I would type, trying to match his voice, measured, fair, patient. When he passed the following spring, the whole town came. Main Street closed early. Women from the beauty parlor brought casseroles, handwritten recipes tucked into cookbooks as gifts. Men removed their hats and spoke of his integrity, his steady hand. After the funeral, I went back to the office alone. The paper could have closed then. No one would have blamed me. A 19-year-old girl running a newspaper was not something our town had ever seen. But I knew every inch of that place. I knew which keys stuck on the typewriter and how to coax them loose. I knew the rhythm of deadlines, the way ink bled if you pressed too hard. So I stayed. There were nights when I would lock up and stand on Main Street under the fading light, the storefronts dimming one by one. The movie theater's marquee would flicker to life, promising romances and westerns I never had time to see. I would feel a tug inside me, a whisper of that campus quad, those lecture halls filled with ambition. Once, a year after I'd let the bus go, another letter arrived. This one from the university again, saying my scholarship could be deferred for one more term if I still wished to enroll. I held it in my hand so long the paper warmed. By then, I had subscribers counting on me. Advertisers trusting me. My mother leaning a little heavier on my arm in the evenings. I wrote back that afternoon, thanking them kindly and declining. The typewriter keys felt different after that, less like stepping stones, more like roots. In 1961, a young man named Thomas Reed walked into the office with a story about a broken water main near his hardware store. He wore his hair too long for my mother's liking and spoke with the confidence of someone who had seen more than one town. "You're the editor?" he asked, glancing around for someone older. "I am," I said. He smiled in a way that suggested he found this both surprising and impressive. Thomas began dropping by more often, first with news tips, then with coffee. He would lean against the doorframe while I typed, telling me about Chicago, where he'd spent 2 years apprenticing before returning home to care for his own aging father. "It's loud there," he said once. "But it makes you feel like you're part of something big." I felt the old ache stir. We married in the spring of 1963. The church gymnasium was decorated with crepe paper and white lights. I wore a simple dress my mother had sewn, and the whole town seemed to hum with approval. Stability. Continuity. A good match. Thomas encouraged me to keep the paper. "It's yours," he said. "It's part of you." And it was. But marriage brought its own rhythms, dinners to cook, a house to tend, children arriving in steady succession. I wrote between naps and after bedtime, my fingers stained with ink and flour in equal measure. Radio programs drifted through the kitchen window as I stirred soup, headlines forming in my mind alongside grocery lists. There were moments, brief, bright flashes, when the old dream flickered again. A regional editor once called, asking if I would consider contributing to a larger paper. "You've got a voice," he said. "Clear and steady." I told him I was flattered. That night, after the children were asleep and Thomas had gone to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant whistle of a freight train. I pictured Chicago again. The newsroom. My name printed boldly, unmistakably mine. In the morning, I dialed the editor's number and thanked him, but said I couldn't commit to the travel his offer required. There was always something, timing, responsibility, love, that made the luminous path seem just slightly out of reach. And yet, life did not feel small. It felt full. School gymnasiums decorated for autumn dances. Porch swings creaking in warm evening air while neighbors shared stories. The scent of rain on hot pavement as my children ran laughing through puddles. Still, every so often, usually in late August when the air turned restless, would think of that bus. I would imagine an alternate version of myself stepping onto it, suitcase in hand, heart pounding. One evening in 1972, after putting the youngest to bed, I found the old scholarship letter again while searching for a recipe in my Bible. The paper had yellowed, the edges softened by time. Thomas came up behind me, reading over my shoulder. "You ever wonder?" he asked quietly. I closed the book, pressing the letter flat between its pages. "Yes," I said. "I do." Outside, a storm was gathering. The sky flashed once, illuminating the porch swing, empty and swaying slightly in the wind. The air smelled electric, charged with something about to break. Thomas reached for my hand. "You know," he said, his voice low, "it might not be too late for some things." I looked toward the window as the first heavy drops of rain struck the pavement, darkening it in widening circles. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to imagine what might happen if I said yes. The rain came down hard that night, drumming against the roof, washing Main Street clean of dust and old gum wrappers and the faint chalk lines from children's hopscotch games. I stood at the window long after Thomas had gone to bed, watching the streetlights blur into halos. "It might not be too late for some things," he had said. The words settled into me like seeds in wet soil. The next morning, I rose before dawn. The house was hushed, the children's doors closed, their breath soft and even. I brewed coffee and sat at the kitchen table with a yellow legal pad. For the first time in years, I wrote not for the paper, not for subscribers or advertisers or town council minutes, but for myself. I wrote about the bus. I wrote about the way the driver had looked at me, waiting, and how the air had shimmered with possibility. I wrote about my father's cough and the weight of ink-stained responsibility. I wrote about the quiet heroism of small towns and the way ambition can glow and ache all at once. When the sun rose, I had filled 6 pages. I folded them carefully and slipped them into an envelope addressed to the regional editor who had once called me. I did not ask for a job. I did not promise travel. I simply sent the essay, as one might send a message in a bottle, unsure who might find it. Weeks passed. Life resumed its familiar cadence, packing lunches, balancing accounts, covering a contentious school board debate about new math textbooks. The children tracked mud through the hallway, Thomas repaired a loose step on the porch. The storm of that night seemed to have been only weather, not prophecy. Then, one afternoon in early October, a letter arrived with a Chicago postmark. My hands trembled as I opened it. He remembered me. He remembered my voice. He said the essay was honest in a way that newspapers often were not. He asked if I would consider contributing a monthly column, reflections on small-town life, on change, on the things that bind communities together. No travel required. Deadlines manageable. I read the letter twice, then a third time, just as my father once had. Thomas found me standing in the kitchen, smiling and crying all at once. "Well?" he asked. "Well," I said, laughing softly, "it seems I've been offered a corner of the world after all." The first column appeared that November. My name, my own name, printed clearly at the top. Not beneath my father's, not tucked away in fine print. I held the paper as if it were something fragile and alive. The town reacted with a mixture of pride and surprise. At the beauty parlor, women waved the paper at me while sitting under their humming dryers. "We always knew you had it in you," they said, as if it had been obvious all along. At church, men who had once questioned whether a young woman could run a newspaper shook my hand a little more firmly. I wrote about porch swings and harvest festivals, about factory closures and high school football games under Friday night lights. But woven through it all were the quieter truths, about choices, about roads not taken, about the way love can anchor you even as it narrows your horizon. The column did not make me famous. It did not carry me to Chicago lecture halls or into bustling newsrooms. But it gave me something I had not realized I still needed, a sense that the girl with the suitcase had not vanished entirely. She had simply changed shape. Years rolled forward the way they do, children growing taller than me, Thomas's hair silvering at the temples. The typewriter in the office was eventually replaced by an electric one, its hum steadier, less temperamental. Main Street shifted too. New storefronts appeared, old ones closed for good. The movie theater stopped changing its marquee by hand and installed plastic letters. In 1978, our eldest left for college on a Greyhound bus not unlike the one I had watched depart. I stood on the platform beside him, straightening his collar, smoothing imaginary wrinkles from his jacket. The bus engine idled, low and insistent. "Mom," he said, grinning, "I won't miss it." "I know," I answered. When the door hissed closed and the bus pulled away, I felt no stab of regret this time. Only a deep, steady pride. The future was unfolding for him in ways I had once imagined for myself, and it did not feel like a theft. It felt like continuity. Thomas squeezed my hand. "You did good," he murmured. "I never did move to Chicago. I never sat in a grand newsroom with city sirens wailing outside the windows. But over the years, letters arrived from readers across the state, farmers, teachers, young women wondering whether to leave or stay. They wrote to say my words had made them feel seen, less alone in their own crossroads. Sometimes, late at night, I would sit at the kitchen table long after everyone else was asleep. The house would creak softly, settling into itself. I would think about that 19-year-old girl in her good skirt, suitcase in hand, standing under yellow station lights. I do not pity her. She made the best choice she could with the heart she had then. She chose love and loyalty and the fragile survival of something her father had built. She chose a life that would be steady and rooted rather than bright and uncertain. There are days, even now, when I wonder who I might have been had I stepped onto that bus. Perhaps I would have written headlines that changed policies. Perhaps I would have lived in a small apartment overlooking the rumble of elevated trains, my name known in circles far beyond our county line. Or perhaps I would have found another crossroads there, another moment when ambition collided with responsibility, and made a different compromise. What I know is this: the paths we do not take do not disappear. They linger in us, shaping our questions, sharpening our gratitude. They remind us that our lives could have been otherwise, and that the shape they did take is not accidental. In the end, my world was not small. It was specific. It was textured with the scent of rain on hot pavement, with radio songs drifting through open windows, with the clatter of dishes and the steady clack of keys beneath my fingers. It was built of porch swings and town council arguments and children's laughter echoing down hallways. The scholarship letter is still tucked inside my Bible, its paper brittle now, the ink slightly faded. I keep it not as a symbol of regret, but as a reminder of the girl I once was, brave enough to dream of leaving, brave enough also to stay. Sometimes, when the house is quiet and the evening air turns restless in late August, I close my eyes and hear the distant rumble of a bus engine. I see the door folding shut, the driver glancing at me one last time. And I see myself stepping back. Not because I was afraid. But because, in that moment, love asked more of me than ambition did. And though the future I imagined folded like an unread letter, another one opened in its place, written not in headlines and city lights, but in steady ink, across years of ordinary, luminous days.